A few years ago, I paid a personal branding agency good money, real money. The kind of money that stinks when you look back at the invoices. They had a process, workshops, frameworks, sessions with language that sounded purposeful and structured. There were questions about strengths and values and what lights you up. It felt serious. It felt like progress. And somewhere in the middle of it all, they said the thing that everyone says. Follow your passion. I didn't challenge it at the time. I wanted it to mean something. It sounded like it should mean something. But when I looked at what actually came out of that engagement, the strategy, the positioning, the direction they handed me, it had almost nothing to do with me specifically. It could have been written for anyone, because the advice itself was built for anyone, generic, dressed up as insight. They had taken one of the most overused phrases in personal development, added a logo and a slide deck, and sold it back to me as a roadmap. I burned real money finding that out. That's where I want to start today. Not with a feel-good reframe, with the honest version of what this phrase actually does to people, including people who are paying someone else, sometimes a lot of money, to help them find their direction. Follow your passion is advice that survives because it requires nothing from the person giving it. It sounds wise. It suggests motion. It implies care for the other person's fulfillment. And critically, and this is the part that nobody talks about, it carries a hidden promise that if you find your passion, the hard work somehow takes care of itself. That the struggle becomes bearable when you're doing what you love. That clarity of feeling replaces the need for discipline. That's the embedded fantasy. And it's why the phrase keeps circulating. Not because people have tested it, not because it worked for them, but because it feels good to say. It signals optimism. It signals that you believe in the other person. And it costs you nothing, because you don't have to do any work to figure out who they actually are. I've heard this from career coaches, from life coaches, from consultants, from well-meaning people on LinkedIn who have built a following by making everyone feel like their purpose is just around the corner. And from a personal branding agency that charged serious money to help me find my direction and couldn't get more specific than a phrase I could have read for free on any motivational account. Which tells you something important. When the people who are being paid to help you find your passion can't do better than that line, the problem is not with you. The problem is with the advice. It's a slogan masquerading as strategy. Let me be precise, because I don't want to throw the whole idea out. The core of it isn't entirely false. There's something true underneath, follow your passion. But it's a conclusion being presented as a starting point. And that inversion is where the damage happens. Passion, real passion, the durable kind that doesn't evaporate when the work gets difficult, is not something you discover lying dormant inside yourself, waiting to be found. It is something that develops. It follows work, it follows competence, it follows the experience of carrying something difficult for long enough and finding out that you can. The actual sequence is almost the opposite of what the advice suggests. You do not find your passion and then become skilled. You become skilled through repetition, through effort, through staying when it's boring and unglamorous and nobody's watching. And somewhere in that process, meaning starts to emerge. Not immediately, not loudly, but it appears. And what you realize when it does is that the meaning grew out of the mastery, not the other way around. Cal Newport wrote a book about exactly this, So Good They Can't Ignore You, where he argues that passion is a side effect of getting exceptionally good at something, not a prerequisite for it. The research he cites is unambiguous. The people with the highest career satisfaction are not the ones who started by following their passion. They are the ones who built rare and valuable skills and, through that competence, earned the autonomy and agency that passion is supposed to provide. But nobody puts develop rare skills through years of deliberate effort on an inspirational poster. Do they? I don't think so. Most people are not repeating this phrase because they thought it through. They are repeating it because it sounds right and because it feels good and because questioning it requires you to offer something better, which is harder. Here's the real harm. Here's what happens to people who take this advice seriously. They wait. They are waiting for the signal, the moment of clarity, the feeling that announces, this is it, this is what I'm supposed to do. And while they are waiting, they do not go deep on what is in front of them. They hold back. They treat their current work as temporary, as something they are enduring until the real thing arrives. They stay in the shallows. And because they stay in the shallows, they never develop the level of mastery that would actually produce the feeling they are waiting for. It is a trap built into the advice itself. And eventually, and this is the part that is genuinely difficult to watch, they start to believe something is wrong with them. Everyone else seems to have a thing. Everyone else seems to know. So why don't I? What did I miss? The doubt compounds, the hesitation deepens. And what gets labeled as a passion problem is actually a sequencing problem. They were told to find the feeling first. Nobody told them that the feeling comes later. Nothing is wrong with them. They were given the wrong map. So, if what is my passion is the wrong starting question, what's the right one? I've come to think the more useful question is, what am I actually able to carry well? Not what excites me in theory, not what I would do if money were irrelevant, not what I dreamed about at 22, but what I can carry with responsibility, consistently, under real pressure, well enough that it starts to produce something. What can I stay with long enough for the depth to appear? Because responsibility does something that passion does not. It builds skill. It forms judgment. It reveals your actual limits, which is information you cannot get any other way. It creates consequence, which keeps you honest in a way that enthusiasm alone never does. And through all of that, slowly, without announcing itself, meaning begins to appear. There is a framework called Vitruvian Wheel that maps life across 4 arcs simultaneously: health, character, relationship, and meaning. Not sequentially, all at once. What is useful about that framing here is this. Follow your passion collapses everything into one arc: meaning. It treats meaning as the destination and assumes everything else will align. But meaning built without character is hollow. Meaning pursued at the expense of health is unsustainable. You cannot optimize one arc and expect the others to take care of themselves. Everything has to be carried. That is not a metaphor. That is the actual work. My own story does not have a single turning point. There was no moment where everything clicked and I knew what I was supposed to do with my professional life. What happened was slower and less dramatic than that. The compliance years were not a passion. The IBM years were not a calling. But I was building something the whole time, without a name for it, without a framework, without anyone telling me it would eventually matter. I was developing pattern recognition. I was learning how to see problems that other people were not asking yet. I was getting good at a specific kind of thinking, going upstream, questioning the premise, finding the actual root cause before anyone started proposing solutions. That did not feel like passion at the time. It felt like work, demanding, sometimes frustrating, often invisible work. But I was carrying it, and I was carrying it well enough that it kept producing something. And slowly, over years, what I was good at and what I cared about converged. That convergence became strategic opposition. The methodology was not invented, it was excavated from what I already been doing. The work created the meaning, not the other way around. That is also why the advice from that personal branding agency was useless. They were looking for a passion to build a brand around, but the brand was already in the work. They just didn't know how to look for it, because looking for it requires understanding a specific person deeply, not deploying a generic framework that sounds profound in a workshop. So here is where I land. If you have never felt the clarity of, this is my passion, you are not broken. You are not behind. You are not missing something that everyone else has. You are at a different point in the sequence that most people describe backwards. The question is not, what am I passionate about? The question is, what is worth carrying, given who I am becoming? And can I carry it well enough, long enough, for something to emerge from it? Because what you carry well over time, through the boring parts, through the doubt, becomes what you care about. That is the direction. That is the actual sequence. And if someone is charging you to help you find your purpose and their best output is follow your passion, they are selling you a phrase, not a direction. They did not do the work of understanding you. They gave you something that feels like wisdom and functions like noise. I know, because I paid for the phrase. Think before you act, and see you next week.